Well, Ari, thank you for joining. You definitely won the award for coolest background for a Zoom call.
Thank you. This is a painting I live with. It's by an LA artist named Joshua Nathanson.
Oh, it's really cool.
Thank you.
Well, to start, maybe, can you just give people a bit of background on yourself and Clutter and its business and what you do?
Sure. So I've lived in LA for most of my life. I went to USC, studied business there, and I began my career as a product manager at an internet company in LA called Shopzilla, which eventually exited to Scripps, an East Coast publishing company. At the time, I was running their multivariable testing platform for them and working for a really talented founder named Farhad. I then went on to work at another internet company in LA called Lower My Bills, which was founded by Matt Coffin, another really talented entrepreneur. That company exited to Experian, the credit agency, and I was at the time really acting within the capacity of a GM running their auto insurance vertical for them. After working for two really talented founders, I got the entrepreneurial bug myself and decided to co-found my first venture-backed startup, an ad network that is still in business today over a decade later called GumGum. GumGum is one of the world's largest ad networks. And I started the business and helped run it for about 5 years, and then ultimately decided I wanted to move to San Francisco. And in San Francisco, I co-founded my second venture-backed startup, this time a mobile ad network called Pocket Change that Google funded from start to finish. And to be honest, I never found product market fit with that startup, and I failed. And it was really when I was winding down the business, looking to move back to San Francisco, that I stumbled upon kind of moving storage and found it to be a fascinating category, and then co-founded Clutter in 2015, although we came up with the idea in 2013, but the business really wasn't fully operational until 2015.
Got it. And just help people understand, like, kind of what Clutter does. I mean, I think everyone intuitively understands it's kind of almost virtual self-storage, but that can mean a lot of things. And I think Clutter's taken a lot of, I think, really unique approaches to that. So can you kind of unpack the business a little bit?
Sure. So, people refer to our value prop as virtual self-storage or on-demand storage. We like to call it door-to-door storage. And what that means is, you push a button and we show up at your home. We send professional movers that we hire, train, and manage ourselves. They're uniformed, and they walk through your door, and you point out the items that you want to put into storage. And we will begin by photographing and cataloging the items so that 6 months or 6 years from now, you don't forget that you have that golf bag with us. And then we will wrap the item using packing materials that we provide, cardboard boxes, wardrobe boxes, moving blankets, etc. And then using our fleet of vehicles, hopefully you've seen them, they're these large teal trucks that say Clutter on the side. We will transport your items to one of our safe, secure, and smart facilities. These are typically very large warehouses outside the city, akin to an Amazon distribution center, where we control the space, we safely store your stuff. And once it's in our four walls, you can go to clutter.com and you get a beautiful photo catalog of everything that you have in storage. And today you're one click away from having an individual item like your golf bag returned to your doorstep the next day, or all of your items returned to your doorstep or your next home whenever you like. And the future vision is that these smart warehouses allow you to do more than just put stuff into storage and pull stuff out of storage. The idea is with one click, you can dispose your stuff, donate your stuff, sell it, maybe ship your skis to your house in Aspen because you're going to go there for a few months. So that's really kind of the value prop today and the long-term vision.
It's really interesting. And it's interesting, hearing you describe it, because it's like, on the one hand, you can conceptualize it as like the virtualization of stuff. But if you look at it more from like a real estate lens, there's something that feels very thematic that we see throughout real estate tech, which is this concept of space and location becoming more amorphous, right? Like I think about, self-storage pre-clutter as being like, well, I'm going to take my sofa to a self-storage facility within 5 miles of me because anything longer than that is too annoying. But really, it almost feels like you have all these advantages by, being able to store stuff together, right? And capture almost like the geographic arbitrage and have stuff being able to go anywhere. It's almost like you've removed place from the concept of self-storage. Is that kind of how you think about it?
That's exactly right. I mean, if you have the convenience of clutter, which is we pick up stuff at your doorstep and we bring stuff back to your doorstep, why do you care where it's stored? If you live in Pacific Palisades, do you really need a big, ugly self-storage building walking distance to where you live? No, you'd rather have a park there or maybe a cafe, something that the community can benefit from. So what we like to do is store your stuff in industrial zones where Walmart exists, Amazon exists, where real estate companies like Prologis have a lot of available space for us. And, I remember when we first pitched Sequoia for our Series A, one of the things that they were keen to notice before anyone was that what we were doing was using technology to leverage a business model innovation. It wasn't that it was a technical innovation, it was that there was a business model innovation. And what that innovation was that you don't need to store your stuff 3 to 5 miles from where you live. Now, the reason why this didn't work as a model 5, 10, 20 years ago when some of the incumbents tried it, is it turns out you need to build a lot of software, not to lose stuff, to make sure routes are on time, to make the economics as profitable as possible. And so, my background's always been in software, and when I looked at, the category and realized that there was an opportunity to apply technology to leverage this business model innovation, it just made perfect sense to me.
And I imagine also like a component of it is the densification of space. I remember you describing like how you use these large warehouses and how you pack things into them. And it's almost like a high-tech Tetris game, right? at some level. And
it is. I actually use the word Tetris all the time to describe it. Yeah.
But I contrast that, like, when I had my stuff in a self-storage facility, I would like open the gate, and I feel like it was like Indiana Jones entering the Temple of Doom. Like the sofa was going to fall on you, or boxes were going to crash down. Clearly, nothing was optimized. I mean, how much of it is technology around that? Like, how do you store stuff most efficiently based on both the type of stuff, but also the dimensions of the stuff and how consumers request it and use it?
Sure. So, before I answer that question, I'll share a funny story with you. When we started the business, obviously we didn't have enough capital to get our own warehouses like we do now. And so we were pretty resourceful, and we reached out to warehouses throughout the Southern California area and asked if we could have a small section of their warehouse for our business. And one of our first warehouses was in downtown LA, and it was a multi-level warehouse. I think there was 3 or 4 stories, if I remember correctly. And we were on one, but what was interesting was on another floor was the actual warehouse that they used in Indiana Jones for that scene where they store, I think it was the Grail, or one of the artifacts that they discovered that burned.
That's what I was referring to, actually. Like that scene where boxes and rocks are falling everywhere.
That's right. Yeah, so that's actually, it was shot at the same warehouse, funny enough. To give you, I'll give you kind of two examples of how we use software. So first of all, I think the important thing to note about Clutter is, we believe in vertical integration, and that goes all the way down to the software stack. And so everything that we use is proprietary. Other than like Slack, Zoom, and Gmail, we've built it all. To give you an extreme example of what I'm talking about, we employ a wide variety of hourly team members in the field, in the warehouse, in our call centers, and they're employees, but they're compensated hourly. So it's important to track their hours. I think most companies, most entrepreneurs would just take some off-the-shelf, time clocking software and use it. We actually built our own software to help our team members track their times, schedule shifts, swap shifts. And the reason why we did that is not because we have some sort of aversion to third-party software, but we knew from a very early stage that data would ultimately allow us to deliver a better customer experience, to increase our margins so we could lower prices and offer the same value or more value at those lower prices. And data has really been key to everything that we do. Another example of how we leverage technology is really in the warehouse, like you were alluding to. When you have 500,000 square feet and it's racked 40 feet high, right? That's effectively 4 stories. And someone goes on clutter.com and says, I want, this one box back because it has my college mug in it and I'm feeling sentimental. It's going to be pretty hard to find that mug if you don't have your own software and you don't know exactly where it is in that warehouse.
Right.
We're talking in a warehouse of that size, you're probably pushing 6 figures in terms of the number of items that are being stored. So now you're being asked to find a single mug. And there's just no off-the-shelf software that's going to facilitate that. Like the reality is that, we are a technology company that operates a supply chain. And every supply chain is unique. And so the idea that you're going to take off-the-shelf software to manage your unique supply chain was always crazy.
Yeah. And I imagine there's also just, when you talk about people's stuff, there's an intimacy, there's a sentimentality that probably you can almost use predictively, meaning you can probably assume no one wants their skis in the summer,
Yes,
right?
That's correct.
There's certain like intuitions you can follow,
That's
but
right.
I'd be curious if there's any like just almost counterintuitive things. Like what's the stuff that people request most frequently from storage?
We had all these assumptions when we started the business, and for the most part, they proved to be true. One of them was that people would use us seasonally.
Right.
And lo and behold, every Halloween, demand for what we call, sub jobs, which are really just pickups and deliveries, increases.
Right.
And it's exactly what you would think. The fake pumpkin, maybe a box of costumes, and same thing for, Christmas. In terms of items that we probably didn't think people would store, we knew people would obviously store everything in their homes. We just didn't know people had that many mattresses. Like, it has blown my mind how many mattresses people own. We have entire sections of the warehouse just full of mattresses. And so it's been really interesting to see kind of consumer behavior. It also varies geo by geo. In Los Angeles, we have a lot of refrigerators being stored.
Yeah.
And in New York, we don't, and I think it's something about how landlords operate and kind of their social contract with their tenants. In one city, they provide the refrigerator, in another city, they don't.
Right. That's so interesting. And there's 2 other things I wanted to ask you about with respect to your business. One is you made this decision to vertically integrate, right? And be a full stack storage, delivery, moving solution. I'd love to hear the rationale of how you thought that through. And then almost tying that into my next question, which is you kind of went into real estate, right? Like now you, to some extent, you own the very assets that at the outset, I would have thought you're trying to disrupt. I'd love to hear that logic of how you thought about making that decision to go into self-storage itself.
Early on, it was obvious to me that we were, as I mentioned earlier, a technology company that was going to have to learn how to manage a supply chain. And so I asked myself, what are the world's largest supply chains that are operated at a high degree of excellence? And Walmart came to mind. And so I read Sam Walton's autobiography. And in it, he kept espousing all the benefits of vertical integration. And I realized, you know who else read this book? Jeff Bezos. I can promise you he read that book in the very early days of Amazon. It's so obvious he read that book. And I said to myself, if it works for Sam and it works for Jeff, it's probably going to work for Clutter. Why, try to be why try to be kind of contrarian just for the purpose of being different? And I started thinking through, well, what are the benefits of vertical integration? I know what the drawbacks are. The drawbacks are it takes a ton of capital and a lot of time, and it's really hard because, if you're a software person like I am, you're going to have to learn a whole new set of skills that you would never have to learn if you're, launching the next Instagram. But the benefits were overwhelmingly positive. One was, if you want to deliver reliable customer experience at a high level, you have to be in control. You cannot outsource your customer interactions to another company. You just can't. So you need to employ everyone. And by the way, it's also the right thing to do to give people workers' comp and health benefits and career growth opportunities. So we never used 1099 contractors. I know now it's taboo to use them and everyone's employing everyone, but we were the first actually to begin employing our hourly team members. The second benefit, that's related to customer experience is when you have your own assets and you apply technology to them, you can leverage the data to improve the customer experience. To your point, if you expect the skis to be pulled right before winter season, move them around the warehouse so that they're easier to retrieve so you can get them to the customer faster, for example. Outside the customer experience, but somewhat still related to the customer experience, the benefit of vertical integration is you capture all the margin at every step. And the point is, as Sam Walton describes or discusses, not to hoard the margin and be greedy, but to reinvest it in the customer experience by either offering more value or lower prices, or somehow more value at lower prices. And that's how you truly create something meaningful, especially in a category that's commoditized, like storage is. Like, if I'm going to be intellectually honest, storage is a commodity. So what's the key to, being a leader and innovating in a commoditized industry? I believe it's vertical integration. Because ultimately it comes down to, can you offer more value at lower prices? So every little, penny or nickel or dime that you share with someone else, I would argue, be long-term greedy, build out the infrastructure so you don't have to do that, and reinvest that margin or that money into the customer.
It's interesting to hear you talk about that, because it's something we see in all of these new kind of tech-enabled real estate businesses, and that is oftentimes overlooked by the real estate incumbents, which is the mentality, the psychology of being customer-centric, right? And being able to deliver a brand. Like, Clutter has a brand. Everyone I talk to, they love Clutter. They see your trucks. They maybe had a friend who's experienced and it's differentiated. Whereas when you think about self-storage, I kind of think about, to be honest, the color orange, right? And there's no brand. Maybe I think about the color green because I've driven by, but there's no sense of like, wow, that is a differentiated customer experience. And it's just interesting because we see that in so many spaces. You see it in office space, right? If you think about even what WeWork or what Industrious' core innovation was, it was layering in a brand that could delight the customer by being more full stack, by being more full service. But I also wanted to ask you, you're now in the self-storage business, and I'd love to hear, how did you think about that? Like, what was that epiphany that you almost wanted to go towards the space you're disrupting.
Sure. So to give everyone a little bit of context, obviously we have our door-to-door business where we store consumer household goods in large warehouses that we operate. We are, pursuing that model to effectively disrupt the incumbents. The incumbent model is called self-storage, not door-to-door storage. Self-storage is that big, building that you see 3 to 5 miles from where you live that sometimes looks like a prison, that you drive to yourself and you store your belongings there for as long as you want. That's a very big market that we're trying to disrupt. To give your viewers a sense of how big the market is, there are 55,000 of those buildings in the US alone. If you take all the land that those buildings occupy and you add them up, it's more land than every single McDonald's and Starbucks combined. Okay. So it's a lot of land being used for self-storage. Now we own 4 of those buildings ourselves. And you're probably asking yourself, well, why would you do that? You're acquiring the very asset you're trying to disrupt. And doesn't make any sense. Well, I agree, it's a little counterintuitive, but what we've realized through this journey is that the reason why people purchase storage or moving or whatever it may be is that they're going through a life event. It could be a death, a divorce, or a marriage, or a birth in the family. Maybe they're enlisting in the military. Maybe they're moving from California to Florida. But they're going through these high stress, high anxiety life events. And our mission is to help them, to make their lives more convenient. Some people need door-to-door storage because they're old or disabled or just, frankly, they value their time and they don't want to do the work themselves. So they're happy to have our professional movers help them with the moving and packing process into storage. But there are other customers that want daily in-person access. They don't mind driving down the street to their self-storage building and opening up that locker and picking and packing their own stuff. Now, for us, the challenge was not should we offer it. It was clear to us that if you care about the customer, what you want to do is say yes to them as much as possible. And part of owning self-storage and including it in our portfolio of value props is being able to say yes more and more. The challenge was, how do we differentiate it? Because to your point, if you look at the 55,000 buildings in the US right now that are being used for self-storage, there's nothing differentiating any of them other than a coat of paint. There really isn't, if we're going to be honest. So we looked at it and we said, well, what if you take this big supply chain that we've built and attach it to these buildings? What types of value could you offer the customer that you couldn't before? Can you have 1 + 1 = 3, right? And so, our vision that we started pursuing almost 12 months ago was to be able to do that. And I'll get into kind of what that vision is, but 4 months ago, we spent $150 million to purchase 4 self-storage assets, the land, the building, and the customers within the building in the New York metro area. And over the past 12 months, we've been working to not only offer self-storage and door-to-door to our customers in the New York metro area, but a way to seamlessly transition between the two. Mm-hmm. So what does that look like? Maybe you want in-person access, but you don't have a truck. And so you want us to help you move all your household goods into your self-storage locker. And, the couch will sit there until you need us to move the couch for you. But the golf bag you can get yourself any day of the week, right? So we use our supply chain to completely move you into a self-storage locker. You get movers, you get a truck. We can even photograph and catalog your stuff for you. And then on a weekend, 3 weeks from now, you go and you grab the golf bag yourself. Or maybe, you you want us to dispose of something from your self-storage unit or ship something from your self-storage unit. These are all things that our supply chain can and will continue to be able to offer. And so it's really about giving the customer as much flexibility as possible so you can say yes to them whenever they need you to do something. And you'll see us do a number of other things over time that I don't want to go into, but it's going to be a truly unique self-storage experience.
And it also, again, seems so consistent with, just a macro theme, which is when you reimagine a business model, right? With that lens of customer centricity, with that lens of vertical integration, it enables you to approach the incumbent business model in a whole new fashion. And it's sometimes interesting, like, when I think about, like you said, self-storage, it's a commodity product, right? The major innovation is a roof and a lock, and everyone's got it, right? So, what could you bring to that? What could you lend to that? How could you augment that from a customer experience perspective by having the supply chain that you do? And I think that's why in a lot of spaces, people are shocked now when co-working companies are buying real estate buildings themselves. They're buying office buildings themselves. And it's actually with that same logic that kind of holds true, which is the unique perspective on the customer gives you that opportunity to reimagine the actual disrupted business model, which provides a growth channel that can be really accelerated. I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the interesting trends that you're seeing in light of what we're all living through right now. I think about COVID and the economic and sociological fallout from it as being profound. And we're in the early innings of that right now. And so when I think about living space, right, like my living space and the stuff in that space, is there any interesting trends around people wanting less or more stuff in their home, in their residence, given that now, like, your work environment and your home environment have been conflated? Is there interesting trends you're seeing around that, like what people want in their home?
Sure. Demand for storage has gone up because of COVID.
Right.
And I think it's because of two reasons. One, you're going through life events, you're moving from one apartment to the next. That's usually when you need storage, right? Because you then look at all your stuff and you reevaluate like whether you want to live with it on a day-to-day basis or not. The other thing is, even if you're not moving, you're spending a lot of time in your home. So you look around and you're like, I don't really play golf anymore, but that's a, $800 golf bag and set of clubs. I'm not going to throw it away.
Right.
Let's put it into storage. And so the demand for storage has absolutely, gone up. What we've also seen, which is really interesting, because of some of our partnerships, is an increase in, any type of commerce related to household goods. So people will look at their couch and be like, I never liked that couch. I should get a better couch. I'm on this couch now every day. And so they're actually upgrading a lot of what they live with. We're seeing it in our data, and then also a lot of our e-commerce partners that focus on these types of goods are seeing it as well.
That's really interesting. And, I think about when it was early March, I think people didn't know how to respond. My response was, I was in Los Angeles and I drove out to Utah, where I am right now. And I've been here ever since. And I realized, why am I keeping my apartment in Los Angeles? So I called up Clutter, and I didn't even go back. You guys took everything out of my apartment, and that my mattress is stored amongst all the other mattresses at your warehouse.
Yeah.
I'm curious, are you seeing patterns like that? Like, everyone right now is trying to guess, like, what are the big sociological shifts that are happening? Are cities being abandoned? What is the future of cities? Is this kind of trend towards urbanization now undermined or questioned in a way it hadn't been before? What do you see just in the early data around what people are doing? Are people moving out of cities? Are they downsizing their houses? What are some of those trends you're seeing?
So for decades, urbanization was definitely a tailwind for a lot of categories, right? I would say that that's probably slowing down. But it's not quite what you think. It's not that everyone's moving out of cities. It's actually more interesting than that. People are just moving from one city to another.
Right.
And I'm sad to say this because I love Manhattan, but all of our data shows everyone is leaving Manhattan.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you're in real estate and you currently own in Manhattan, I empathize. If you're in real estate and you don't, this is probably a good time to buy. It's unbelievable how many people are leaving Manhattan, but they're coming to LA or they're going to Miami or Austin. So it's not that urbanization is done. I just think the pattern of urbanization is going to change, and it's going to look a lot more like LA, I think, everywhere, which is, you know, LA used to be a big ring, and it's just grown to be, you know, a ring within a ring within a ring, and now it's just this massive city. You know, Santa Monica to Fontana is 70 miles. Everyone considers that LA County. And
Right.
so I think that's going to happen in Miami and in Austin. What's not going to happen is what's in kind of what we've seen in sci-fi movies for decades, which is the Blade Runner effect, which is effectively Manhattan, which is we all stay within a close proximity, but we go up. I think I'm not saying it's never going to happen, but it's definitely not going to happen in our lifetime anymore because of COVID.
Yeah, and I was thinking a lot about this, and I was talking about this with a Harvard professor that I also interviewed. And it's interesting to think about how there are these cities that have historically been magnets for a certain kind of knowledge worker. And probably the most extreme examples of that are New York, right, which is a massive draw for finance knowledge workers, and San Francisco, which is a massive draw for tech workers. And you think about the winners and losers, because I agree with you. It's almost just like a reshuffling of the deck in terms of where knowledge workers are going. Many companies are saying they're going to be virtual for a very long period of time. But it feels like, and I'm curious what you think about this intuition, it feels like to me, the easiest way to identify the cities that are net losers are where there's the highest spread between cost of living, right, and quality of life, right? Like, meaning,
Right.
and I think probably the most extreme would be San Francisco, right? Where, you know, you have extreme cost of living and a city that's kind of like a Baltimore, Philadelphia, you know, yet rent that are like New York.
Right.
Do you think that it seems like those are the cities that will net lose knowledge workers, but where do you think the net gain is happening? And what do you think are the drivers of that? Like, do you think it's a Miami because of tax reasons, or Austin for tax reasons? Or do you think it's a Salt Lake City or a Boise for lifestyle reasons? Like, what do you think wins, or who do you think wins?
Well, I lived in San Francisco between 2011 and 2013. It was bad back then. It's horrible now. Like, San Francisco is going to contract for sure. And I think, you know, people are going to leave San Francisco at a higher rate than Manhattan, to be honest, because Manhattan has so many other things that pull people in.
It's New York.
It's New York, decade after decade. It's the arts. It's everything. You know, I still love Manhattan. I think San Francisco is going to contract. And they're going to go to LA. They're going to go to Austin. They're going to go to Miami. I don't think they're going to go to Boise, wherever that is, you know.
You don't think so?
No.
And do you think one of the reasons it contracts is both what I said, this kind of cities where there's the most daylight between quality of life and cost of living, but also I would think there's knowledge workers concentrated in San Francisco in an industry which will probably virtualize fastest and first, which is tech, right? I feel like I open the news every day now, and another big tech company is saying work from home forever.
Right.
And you're like, well, who does that impact? You're like, well, that really impacts the peninsula of the Bay Area and San Francisco specifically. And I'm curious also when you think about the future of storage and stuff, because it's kind of the idea of like what stuff means to the individual is kind of a fascinating thing to think about because of this intimacy and sentimentality. In a world where people are more mobile, right, and they're moving episodically city to city, how do you think about self-storage as meeting that future state demand? Is it really like you have your stuff in the cloud? Like there's kind of a cloud network of
Yeah,
stuff that just comes and goes to you wherever you are?
absolutely. And I'm not saying we're delivering that yet, but that's our vision. It's going to take a lot of work to get there. But, you know, what's interesting is I've been an entrepreneur for a very long time. And so I've seen other entrepreneurs pursue, you know, one category after another. And one of the categories that always fascinated me was the shared goods economy.
Right.
And it interested me not in the Airbnb sense, but in the kind of household goods, shared goods economy. Because it was clear to everyone, including me, that there is an amazing value proposition there. But yet one entrepreneur after another failed. And no one has been successful. And it's because what you need to build to solve that problem is a marketplace. The problem with pure marketplaces is that they have a chicken and egg challenge, which comes first. And it's incredibly difficult to build a marketplace. eBay got lucky, Airbnb got lucky, but there are only a handful of them. I've argued for the longest time that storage is the perfect, you know, platform to launch a shared goods marketplace on top of. Today, in Clutter, we store millions of household goods. If we wanted to, and we do, we're just not ready. If we allowed our customers via one click of the button to rent their bicycle or their lawnmower or to share or sell their artwork that's in storage, you know, in a marketplace, you know, boom, we will have overcome the chicken and egg problem that has kind of, I think, prevented a true shared goods marketplace from being successful. So yeah, I think if it's in the cloud, you can do a bunch of things that you've never done before.
What's interesting is to think about the corollary there between transportation, right? Which is there's a lot of similarities in the sense that, you know, traditionally you thought of owning a car. You owned your transportation. It was your property. It was only your car. It just happened to sit idle 95% of the day. And then, you know, Uber said, well, what if we actually make transportation a service? It kind of undermines car ownership. And we're seeing in the US that car ownership probably peaked a few years ago. And I think ride sharing is in large part the canary in the coal mine. It kind of portended that trend. And I think about, like, you know, when I got out here, there's obviously stuff I had to do on my house. And I was like, I need to buy a drill. And so I went on Amazon and I bought a drill. And that drill has been used once.
Yeah.
And it may only be used once. And, you know, forgetting just the economic efficiency, just the environmental impact of that. If that drill could be utilized, you know, by many people, it's like this intersection of, and that's why I was curious to ask you about stuff, is like, it's this intersection of cloud-based things and cloud-based services and property rights, right? Which is, there's a lot of things we don't need to own. We just want the service on demand. And do you view that as like the natural end state for Clutter? Like a world where when I want to drill, I go to Clutter and someone sends a drill to me. If I want to, I don't know, my Christmas tree, right? A fake Christmas tree. I don't need to buy that. I can just rent that. Is that what you think ownership becomes in a world where everything is cloud-based? All your stuff is cloud-based?
By the way, my friend actually is storing his fake Christmas tree with Clutter, funny enough. So you have to take a step back and ask yourself, what do people own? People own three types of things. They own junk, let's be real, right? They own stuff that has asset value, right? It could be an old chest or a golf bag. And then they own stuff that they have a sentimental attachment to. My hope is that we help people not need as much junk in their lives, and that we help them share the stuff that has asset value in their lives, either for other people's benefit or for their own, and that we protect their memories for as long as possible. You know, and I think what people often misunderstand about storage, or about why one person owns one thing and another person doesn't, is that when you look at an object, you cannot infer someone else's sentimental value, right? And so they think of it as junk. No, there is junk, but that's not junk, right? I think the perfect example of this is in the early days, I was walking a handful of venture capitalists through one of our warehouses, and there was an aisle with a lot of televisions. And most of them were new televisions that were big, and everyone understood why they were in storage. But then there was one of those old TVs, the ones that look like a cube, where the lens curves. And someone said, why is someone storing this junk? And another VC said, because I bet you it was in someone's college dorm room.
Yeah.
And I said, that's exactly right. That piece of junk is a time machine into their past. And not all junk is that, but some things are, and we view it as our responsibility to help people protect those things for as long as possible. You know, I actually have a piece of artwork that's not worth anything that I used to have on my wall in San Francisco. I have it in Clutter, and I'm a minimalist. And I have it in Clutter, and I've kept it because it reminds me of those 2 years of my life. And every now and then I log into clutter.com and I see a thumbnail image of it, and it puts a smile on my face. And so, you know, it's important to, I think, be nuanced about all this quote unquote stuff that's being stored.
It's interesting the way you put that, because when I think about all the stuff that I have in storage, there are a few, I'd say precious few items that I have imbued with some kind of sentimental, emotional charge, right? The loss of it or the lending of it would be terrible, right? Like I care about it. I don't need to have it every day, but I need to own it. It's important to me. Right. But that's 5% of the stuff that I have. I don't have that kind of sentimentality with my mattress. It is not pregnant with some emotional meaning for me. It's just a mattress.
No.
And
hopefully not.
I'd probably rather sell it. So when I think about that, it's almost has a profound effect on commerce and the economy, right? Which is this notion of minimalism, right? Of owning fewer things that we endow with meaning, and consuming less, right? And borrowing more and having more shared services.
That's right. Which
is a really fascinating end state. And in some ways, it's like if you were to think about that like a macro economist, right? You're like, wow, that leads to such higher levels of productivity, right? But also lower levels of production, right? Because you don't need to make as many drills. That's probably a good thing.
You still need to make the drill and sell it, but to your point, you don't need as many of them.
Yeah. And also the other interesting thing is quality matters, right? Is the things we make, we want to be higher quality. We want to have more durability. Meaning I brought the cheapest drill, but if that thing's in utilization all over Utah, needs to be of a higher quality, and craftsmanship and what we put into products matters more. Anyway, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I feel like we kind of meandered from Clutter's core business model to like, what is the philosophy of stuff and how does that change? That's a really interesting perspective on it. So, well, thank you, Ari, for joining. I really enjoyed this.
No, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Definitely. All right. See you, Ari.
Stay safe.